When I began to look at Kotter's 8-step process of leading change, I decided to dig deeper into it. So I bought his book, Leading Change. So I started to look at each of these steps individually. And one of the things that he said in his book was that some of the steps could be done simultaneously. So when I looked at them, I decided that I wanted to group them in 4 different groups. I felt like the first 3 steps really went together to create a change in the status quo. I felt like communication and empowering were their own 2 different steps. And then the enforcement of change, that really getting through and getting into that deep change end process, could really be put through step 6, 7, and 8. That's not to say that you should skip any steps. In fact, Cotter is adamant that the change process will not work unless each step is done correctly and completely. The first step is establishing a sense of urgency, which is part of my changing the status quo at the bottom. And that step really is when you start to work to gain support and remove complacency. An example of that, my husband and I have owned a business for about 15 years. It's a very small business. We decided about 15 years ago, or I should say 10 years ago, that we wanted to move from the wedding industry photography to the advertising commercial industry, as in photography. So in order to make that move, we really had to gain support and really had to make sure that our one employee was completely on board. So we really created a sense of urgency by really having a lot of honest discussions with our employee, as well as looking at revenue, time comparison, growth comparison. The wedding industry wasn't doing as well at the time, and the commercial advertising industry had always been pretty solid as far as photography goes. So the second step, creating the guiding coalition, basically is creating that diverse, solid team of thinkers that that make up your full team to lead the change. The 4 key characteristics that Kotter talks about are position power, which is what the type of power that you have in every position. You need to really have a span of people in your coalition. Expertise, having various expertise in your coalition, credibility, and leadership. And when I looked at our business, obviously our guiding coalition was the 3 of us, my husband, myself, and our employee. But we really did have different expertise. My husband knew the industry. He had done a lot of research on the commercial industry side as well. I also was the kind of numbers person at the time, the bookkeeper. I did all of our taxes. So I knew the numbers, and we both had looked into understanding what the commercial industry what we would expect to gain in revenue from that. So we did a lot of looking at that. Credibility, we had already made some connections with the commercial industry at the time. So we felt like we had enough credible evidence that we could do well in the commercial industry. And of course, my husband and I were mostly the leadership between the team. The third step that I have in changing that status quo is developing a vision and a strategy. So the vision itself is really to clarify the direction, motivate action, and aligns the individuals for the next step of really getting into that change. And then the strategy really it makes that vision more feasible. And it allows the followers the employees to see we have a strategy in order to attain our vision. For our business, we really we had a vision, and our vision was to create amazing work for other businesses to help their customers. And our strategy really was a 3-year process. And we did it kind of in thirds since it was 3 years, and I'm a math person. And so year one, we wanted to, our goal was to have 33% of our income or our revenue coming in from the commercial industry and 66 from the wedding industry. And then year two was to kind of flip that and have 66% of our revenue coming in from the commercial industry and 33% from the wedding industry. And then year three, we wanted 100% of our income to be coming in from the commercial industry and not have to do weddings anymore. It took us a little bit longer. It took us about 4 years to truly break out of the wedding industry. But we really felt like it was a very good strategy that really went with our vision. The next group, or the next step that I have, is step 4, which is communicating the change. And that is incredibly important. So I kind of wanted to leave it by itself because the importance of communication, especially with the employees, with the stakeholders, is going to be pivotal in making an organizational change. So what Kotter says is to really keep it simple and to the point, use metaphors, analogies, and examples. I see that as using a lot of graphs and data, simple things that people can really look at and understand. Use multiple forums, use repetition, lead by example, and address inconsistency when needing, and having that two-way communication. So with our own business, we really did, my husband and I led by example. We delved into really looking at and understanding the commercial advertising industry. We discussed a lot of inconsistencies, or some of the inconsistencies that our employee might have seen or brought up. And he was resistant, and actually he was resistant in a way. He was resistant to our strategy. He wanted to jump right in and go 100% into doing full on advertising and just leave weddings behind. And we weren't comfortable with that. I'm definitely a planner, and I definitely need to see a movement and to base our income and our revenue and the livelihoods of our employees on assuming that we were going to get enough jobs to pay the bills and pay everybody. That to me was not something that was feasible. So we definitely did have a lot of communication with him about that, and some resistance as well. We did empower, empowering I thought was also another piece that would be well on its own, because it really takes a lot to empower everybody in a corporation or an industry or an organization to understand and get behind the change. So the step 5, empowering employees for broad-based action, is really removing those structural barriers so the employees feel like they can make the change, and providing that training for their employees and aligning the systems with the vision. So when I look at our business and how we did that, we really did a lot of things that were going to allow us to flourish as newly incoming commercial advertising industry business. And so we bought the equipment that we felt that we would need from, that would be needed through the industry, for perhaps taking product shots, doing headshots. We bought a lot of things that we felt that would really work well with what we already had. We also bought into some business to business advertising through the advertising industry. We were able to get a lot of email addresses and addresses so we could send advertising to advertising businesses, any type of in-house advertising, marketing businesses, marketing, in-house marketing teams and things like that. We also encouraged our employee, and we ourselves made a lot of connections in the advertising industry. We joined a local commercial advertising group. We attended also a national advertising convention to make more connections and to get some feedback from some of the people who have been in the industry for a long time. Which brings us to step 6, 7, and 8, which I really felt was a good place to put those 3 together, because that's kind of where we start. Once you start empowering your employees and we start moving into that change, it's time to really enforce that change and keep that change going. So step 6 is generating that short-term wins. And so I really liked this because it really means a lot, because things can get stale and they can really just not flourish if you don't somehow show that you're making progress. So getting that short-term, showing those short-term wins is really important in this process. So, they talk about providing evidence that the goal is in sight, rewarding for short-term wins. Showing those short-term wins helps to solidify the vision and strategy, undermines resistance. If people feel like they're not moving anywhere, then they're going to start saying, I don't think this is where we should be going. So it keeps everybody on board and it builds momentum. In our business, we did have some short-term wins that we were really excited to share and kind of use that as leverage for our growth. In the first year, we did receive a very large contract to do a large photo campaign for them. In year 2, we ended up making a ton of connections with local agencies. Year 3, we ended up making a connection with a company that was called Oshkosh Airport Products, which is under the umbrella of the Oshkosh Corporation, which they own quite a few smaller businesses. They own Pierce Manufacturing, they own Oshkosh Defense, they own a couple trucking companies, and Pierce is obviously a huge fire truck industry. And so with that, once we were in that small area of the airport products where they make snowblower, like huge snow blowing machines, and they make fire trucks for airports and that type of thing. So they make those things. But once we were in there, we were able to kind of by word of mouth move through other of their smaller businesses. And right now we do probably 75% of their photos for their local businesses. We've definitely worked with some of their other businesses that are across the country. So we have really gotten into a good relationship with them, and they are one of our major suppliers of like revenue. So we try to keep them on board and tight. And we were able to hire 2 more employees to help us run that area. So we've really been successful in that area. So those really small wins have really kept our own momentum growing and going, and our business has grown. So the next step, 7, consolidating gains and producing more change, is using those short-term wins to create more change. And I feel like kind of we did that when we ended up with the year 3 airport products. We just continue to use airport products to continue those gains and kind of even consolidating that together to get one large corporation. Bring in more help, leadership focus on continued clarity and urgency. So we really had a very good, solid change at that point. And that was probably about 5 years ago, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, that we really were able to truly build our business in that way. The last step, anchoring new approaches and culture, really is changing that culture. And one of the things that Kotter says is that this has to come last. You cannot expect to do that at the beginning. You need to really start with changing the infrastructure first before you can change the culture of your company. So he also said that that new approach needs to be result-based. It requires communication and may involve turnover, which we did have some turnover. We lost one of our employees and rehired someone else, and it was a good turnover because it was the employee that really didn't feel like we were running the business like he would. And so he left to do something in the advertising industry on his own, which was a good split for him. So really, we have done a lot. I love the culture of our business. I'm not as involved in it as I was before because I'm working on my doctoral and I'm also working as a teacher in higher education. So I've definitely had a lot of great experience with organizational change myself. So with that, with changing the culture, I think that sometimes this is a cycle where sometimes when you get to that end, because it is an sort of an ever-changing world, then you start changing again. So we've also seen changes in our business as far as additions to our business. So when we became pretty proficient and pretty solid in the photography industry, as far as advertising and commercial industry, we decided to expand that. And then we went into the videography area. And so we've done some commercials and different video shorts, especially the really good area to get into is your social media shorts and that type of thing for some businesses. And we also got into the retouching phase. So we do a lot of retouching for various corporations. We do a lot for Discovery, which owns the Food Network. They own HGTV. So we don't always take the pictures. They just send us the pictures and we retouch them. We actually put people into different backgrounds and things like that. So we have always had to change and grow. As you know, even though we went through one large change, it's still always this process of going into smaller different changes, which indeed helped us during COVID, because when we couldn't get out and do videography and photography, we ended up doing a lot of retouching, and that really helped our business survive the COVID pandemic. So thank you very much. Have a good day.